much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to participate in this important hearing. Appreciate it. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. I represent the northwest part of the state of Oregon, and so this is an issue that's very critical to the economic and environmental priorities of my constituents up and down the West Coast. But in Oregon, for example, many of my constituents have commercial fishing permits for Bristol Bay. They travel there every summer to make a living, still more work as fishing guides. They lead tours of recreational fishermen to the thriving ecosystem in Bristol Bay. According to a recent report by the University of Alaska, Anchorage's Institute of Social and Economic Research, as many as 2,000 Oregon jobs are supported by Bristol Bay salmon fisheries. So my constituents have made it clear to me that they're very concerned about the impact of a proposed mine on the ecosystem and on their livelihood. So it's important that we get the science right on this. I want to ask you, Mr. Nastri, much has been made about the EPA assessing a hypothetical project. In your testimony, you indicated that while final details of the plan may diverge from the public documents filed so far, what won't change are the size, scope, and location of the mine. So based on your experience, especially with EPA, how much more information would EPA have to have about a project that had been officially proposed compared to what has been already discovered about the Pebble Limited Partnership plans through public documents?
The key issue here is the fill and dredge permits, the 404 permits. And one of the key aspects of that is that the fisheries are protected. And under the 404 requirements, you have to show unacceptable adverse harm. The physical dimensions of the mine itself will create significant impacts to the ecological resources in terms of impacts to streams and so forth. So from that perspective, EP has enough information to address the 404 question, and that is, are there unacceptable and adverse impacts? And if so, then the agency has a series of decisions that it can make with regards how to address that.
Thank you. And following up, how does the data that the EPA used in the assessment, the watershed assessment, compare to data that would be considered during a traditional NEPA process, which supporters of the mine proposal have said would be sufficient to protect the ecosystem?
Well, much of the data that's utilized in the watershed assessment would certainly also be utilized in the NEPA process. But again, the decision aspects of both processes are designed to inform policymakers. And the information, certainly with regards to a 404C issue, is certainly there, assuming that the watershed assessment is finalized.
Thank you. And you discussed the Riley-Yoakum report in your testimony, which describes the actions that the EPA could prohibit under its 404C authority, including discharge of dredge material into salmon habitat, discharge of dredge material if it does not meet testing requirements showing that it's not a threat to salmon aquatic life, and the discharge of dredge material that requires treatment in perpetuity. So would the performance standards in the report permit the Pebble Limited Partnership to file for a permit if it was able to engineer a solution to meet those requirements?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I wanted to talk briefly with my remaining time about apparently, Mr. McGroarty, earlier this year you wrote an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal in which you described the U.S. as being tied with Papua New Guinea for last place in the time it takes to get a permit for a new mine. And I suspect that perhaps the history of what happened in New Guinea is a call to our government to slow down. And I hope the U.S. does move carefully on this, because we don't want to repeat the mistakes that were made there. And I just read a quote from the journal Organization and Environment, where they detailed the destruction that was left and the operation of the I think it's Panguna mine. Thousands of acres of rainforest were cut down, and billions of tons of mine waste were dumped into local rivers and their surrounding oceans, degrading drinking water quality and destroying fisheries and local fishing economies. Mine pollution may also have increased death rates on the island, especially among children. In addition, villagers living on or near the mine property were forcibly removed from the area to make way for the mine. And I cite this as an example of the environmental damage that can occur in mining operations. I point out that it's my understanding that this operation in New Guinea was managed by one of the entities involved with this proposed pebble mine in Bristol Bay, and I trust that all of you will agree that we don't want this to happen in our country. Anybody want to agree with that?
We agree. I agree. Sorry.
Well, I certainly agree, and I think, but the point here again is that that you're talking about a mining situation under strict regulatory control in Alaska. You're using examples of systems that were installed under poor regulatory oversight. And the example that I mentioned of the 135 case studies, all of those were not relevant to the modern engineering design of a treatment, storage, and disposal facility. Another example of the exaggerations that we keep hearing, 11 million tons of ore that are all acid generating. In fact, only 17% of the material is estimated to be acid generating as documented in the report, in the assessment. 83% is non-acid generating materials. So I think the problem that keeps coming up on this project is, again, exaggerating the probability of failure and exaggerating the consequences of those failures.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just take a couple minutes. I wanted to recognize that, again, that there are people here from some of the tribes who've come all this way, and I appreciate their presence. It's my understanding that Bristol Bay is home to 25 federally recognized tribal governments, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the public participation part of the assessment. And Mr. Nastri, is it unusual for there to be 2 public comment periods? Because it's my understanding that during the first phase there were more than 200,000 public comments, and during the second phase 877,000 public comments came in. So can you talk a little bit about the effort to involve the public in this assessment process, and especially with the federally recognized tribes?
There's been extensive outreach during this entire process, and it was at every stage of the process, from helping peer review to who peer reviewers could be. There was extensive outreach with regards to the 1 or 2 peer reviews. In my experience, there typically was 1 peer review period, and then the agency would go ahead and finalize and release. I think in an abundance of caution, the agency wanted to make sure that there was as much outreach as possible and to solicit as much input as possible from all of those, and it's continuing to do so. And right now, it had recently closed its second comment period on the second revision that was released. And so they're in the process of compiling and reviewing all of the comments that are submitted, and I'm sure that many of the issues that were discussed today will be addressed once that watershed assessment is finalized and released.
Thank you. And can you comment briefly on the efforts that have been made to work with the federally recognized tribes in the Bristol Bay area?
There have been a number of communications directly with members of the tribal villages. Previously, there was visits to the actual area. I know that there were a number of visits. The administrator herself, Administrator Jackson, had the chance to visit. EPA staff had the chance to actually fly over the proposed site, look at some of the areas that would be impacted by the potential development of the pebble deposit. So there was an extensive ability for the actual staff of the agency to see firsthand what it is that was being discussed. I myself also had the opportunity to visit a number of those villages and see the challenge that they have. So I think that in terms of the agency itself providing the opportunity for engagement, they specifically formed a group to deal with the tribal entities and so forth. They've had numerous opportunities for public input, and I would say that it's really quite extensive.
Thank you very much, and I yield back the remaining time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms.